Welcome to the first episode of the Irish Bear Show. I'm joined today by Anthony, and we will be joined by Robert in just a few moments. How are you doing today, Anthony?
Good, my man. It's been actually a nice hot day in Ireland, which is something that we're not very used to. We're in lockdown day, God knows what number, but overall it's been quite good. Yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite good. You can't complain really when we've had months of lockdown and months of terrible weather, and we have Robert that's joining us today. I don't know what the weather's like there, Robert, but it's good over here for once in Ireland. Robert, you're on mute there.
Thank you for telling me.
There we go.
Yeah, it's surprisingly sunny in here. I mean, and granted, it's a total time difference. Like 2:30 is obviously smack dab in the middle of the workday, but I put something on the work calendar about being busy, and thankfully I'm blocked in my workflow, so couldn't have come at a better time. Excited to talk Bears with you guys. How you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been good. It's been a crazy off season. Where we'll start, and I'll start with you, Anthony, is I guess where the off season started is with that press conference. So it was almost hard to believe what came out of their mouths at the initial press conference, because I think everybody expected some type of change and it just didn't come. So again, what was your first reaction when you heard what, first of all, I guess what McCaskey was saying, what Ted Phillips said, and then eventually when Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy hit the podium?
Can you remember any other press conference like that? Can you genuinely, in the history of sports, remember a press conference like that? I mean, either fire them or back them. So either give them a contract and say, they're our guys, we've got them. I know we're going to get killed in Chicago, around the world, but they're our guys. Or you're out of here, we're going to bring in someone new. That was the worst thing they could have done. Because now suddenly, even though, and we'll get to it later, I'm assuming, but I have a feeling Pace isn't as in trouble as people think. But it was crazy. It was like everything you don't do in a commercial entity, in a sporting entity, they just seem to rock on with. And they've put so much pressure on everybody in Hallis Hall. It's not even funny.
You know, it's funny you say that. You are the first person, Anthony, right? I heard it once, so perfect. You're the first person I've heard that's talked about how they had the option to back him. Because the argument that I've been making, and look, I like to try to approach everything from every side of the equation. And all I remember was everybody wanted them fired. And if they weren't going to fire them, but were going to acknowledge that the season didn't work out the way they wanted to, how were they going to do it? You're right. They could have been a lot more brash, but they weren't. They were kind of meek about it. It was almost like they were apologizing to Chicago for not firing Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, but without offering any real confidence about the direction of the team. It was bizarre. I mean, it was very weird. And Chicago media did a great job just grilling the Bears front office and did everything they could. But like you're talking about, it was the wrong way to start an off season. I don't know how much I would have expected the Bears organization to do better. Like, I know y'all are Irish, so you watch a whole lot of proper football, and there are a lot of organizations that I feel like are much more experienced in handling situations like this than, say, the Chicago Bears. But either way, the one thing that I kept repeating to myself, because I like to try to be as positive as possible, is it's just a press conference, right? Like, we can move on from this and make good decisions. But it was bad, and I'm glad it happened and we could move on to it, though I don't think I ever want to hear the word collaboration again.
Yeah, man, like that. and it was the way it was being said, and it was the terminology that was being used. I agree with you totally. I think that the chance was, as I said, to back them or not back them, but they've put themselves into a hole, because people are going to remember that press conference for years.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that goes from Ted. Like, Ted was lucky as well himself. It's not just Nathan.
Oh yeah,
Nagy and Pace. It's right up the chain, and
it's all of them.
They've really backed themselves into a hole, into a corner, and they've put all their eggs into Andy Dalton. So interesting moves ahead.
Yeah, like you mentioned there, Anthony, is normally you don't need to remember a press conference, and when everybody remembers the press conference, and look, it's happened months ago now, because we were talking at the start of the offseason, but it was the expectations going in, and then they were that ignorant to their fan base. They basically treated the fan base as they were stupid, that they didn't know what they were kind of talking about, and some of the things that they came out with were just ridiculous. I remember listening to it, and it was kind of just on my lunch break at work. I'm like, I'm not listening to this anymore, because you could tell it wasn't truthful. And I know with all the expectation beforehand, there was the rumors of Ted Phillips might retiring, and that I think people expected there wasn't going to be wholesale changes. I think they expected maybe one of Nagy or Pace to stay. But the fact that both of them stay, and it was kind of the same stuff again. But the one argument I've had, and I mentioned it today on Twitter, and the only person I've actually heard talk about this in kind of a lot of depth was Tom Waddle on the Waddle and Sylvie show, was that he believes that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy are not as in trouble over their job as people think that they are. Mm-hmm. And I completely agree, because every single move they've made doesn't look like a GM and a coach that are in the last year that they really need to prove themselves. And that's what gets me. I'm convinced, even though it's not been shown, that they probably have gotten contract extensions. Have you got the same kind of opinion, Robert, that with every move that they've made this offseason, that this can't be a GM and a head coach that are fearing for their jobs at the end of the season?
I think it's one of two options, and both look the same right now, so there's no real way to know. It's either that they got a contract extension, because that looks like it, like there's that picture of Pace from, I think it was Alabama's second pro day yesterday, where he's like smiling and laughing. So that doesn't look like a GM that's on the edge of his seat, though he's not going to look like that all the time. The other one, and this would be surprising because most of us know George McCaskey to be kind of a meek man. I wouldn't say like weak. Make sure that it's like meek with an M, but he's not loud. He's not brash, and he doesn't know details and specifics about football. He may have put a moratorium on future spending that basically, unless I sign off on it, you can't do it. So Kenny Golladay, best you're going to get is the $11 million that you have. Russell Wilson, if you can get him, sure, but if not, I'm not signing off on you trading away trading away resources for Jimmy Garoppolo. You can't trade that 2022 first round pick unless I say so, because it looks like the Bears are actually paying their debts in a sense, where they're not moving more money in the future than they feel like they have to. They had to let Kyle Fuller walk for oft-injured Desmond Trufant. Like, a lot of moves that we hate as fans are actually not so bad if they're on a pseudo rebuild path, which would be really weird because Pace and Nagy are in the last year of their deals, but they may not have another option or if George McCaskey's basically saying, hey, you spent all of this year's money last year, you can't spend any of next year's money now. So, draft well, guys, and leaving him to it. I don't know. But like you're talking about, Anthony, that if he's not backing them and basically says, work a miracle or you're gone, this is what that would look like. And I know Brad Bigg said something, mid-January? He talked about, and I think he was one of the only ones to mention it, firing Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace would have cost the Bears $20 million in a year where they lost revenue. Is there a chance that for a family like George McCaskey that doesn't have an outside revenue generator, the Bears are their revenue, that they're basically saying, or that there's a chance Pace and Nagy are getting this redemptive chance because the Bears just don't want to pay that money right now when they could kick the can down the road a year? I don't know. I have no idea.
And coming back on that, and this is where it gets weird, is they go after Trent Williams. Mm-hmm. They go a crap load of money for Trent Williams. They go to give a crap load of money for Galladay, right? And then they go and say, actually, you know what? No, reverse. Bye-bye, Kyle. Thanks very much for your time. Good luck. By the way, they did Kyle Fuller dirty. They really did. Wait until they announced that, having 3 days beforehand saying that he's going to stick around. That's not right. Anyway, the point is that they are they then playing games? Are they then saying they were never really in for Galladay? They were never really in for Williams, but they wanted the fans to think that because they wanted to change the narrative of the story. So changing the narrative of the story makes it much more easy to sell kind of merchandise or sell conversations about, the Bears. Right. Knowing that they have Dalton coming down the road, which let's call a spade. He's not exactly what the Bears fan base were expecting.
No.
And therefore, we know that's coming. So let's try and go the other way by going, look, here's a nice little shiny thing that you can see in Galladay or shiny thing in Williams. We're never going to get them, but we're in for them. It's just the whole thing has just been, and I think it's all come from the press conference. That's my thoughts.
I think a lot of it's coming from the Russell Wilson speculation too. I mean, had the Bears landed Russell Wilson, which let's be real, guys, they've made it abundantly clear. Like they've made it almost obnoxiously clear. Hey guys, did you know we tried to get Russell Wilson? And had they gotten him, the Trent Williams thing makes a lot more sense. Maybe he had the sign off to, okay, you know what? Fine. You want to spend future money on one of the best left tackles in football? Go for it. If you can land him, but you can't go higher than this. I don't know. This is the weirdest offseason because I don't know what direction they're trying to walk this team into. I mean, I don't think Andy Dalton, for instance, was anybody's first choice. He wasn't my first choice. But when I look at the quarterback options available, he fits Nagy's scheme for whatever you think about that the best. And it's not that surprising given the laser connection. I would hope, for crying out loud, he is not the Bears' best quarterback going into 2021, but I'm also impatient. I mean, this is the kind of thing where I look at the Bears' schedule. I assume you guys have talked about this. Bears' schedule next year is a freaking nightmare. It's like Baltimore and Cleveland, obviously Green Bay twice, or Pittsburgh, Seattle, assuming they have Russell Wilson, Tampa Bay, now the Raiders. They're not a bad team, even though they gutted their whole offensive line. So actually, I don't know what they are. But the point is, we are playing Murderer's Row next year. And so if you told me that they are going to throw Andy Dalton and little else out as a team that's just kind of supposed to lose a bunch of games and end you up with like the 5th, the 6th pick in the draft next year, I'd actually look you dead in the eyes and be like, that's not a bad plan. This is the right year to do it. You could field a C-plus team and still go 13, just by the nature of your schedule. So you'll end up with a high draft pick, even if your team doesn't totally suck. But I don't know. This is the most frustrating part is that with Justin Fields now reportedly starting to fall down draft boards, or maybe he's just falling down fan draft boards, we don't know. If he's there at number 9, are you telling me Ryan Pace, with his job on the line, may not see a chance to trade up for less than it would have cost to go to number 4, which, if you learned anything from the San Francisco trade, would have taken a haul? I wouldn't be surprised, given the Vic Fangio connection, that there may be something there, especially since they need a quarterback, and we have 2 perfectly good replacement quarterbacks.
You keep selling that story, my man. You keep selling that story.
Hey, who knows? That's the thing. It all comes down to draft day. And for crying out loud, the Russell Wilson thing, fans don't want to hear this. I know they don't. They want to be done. We want to either be mad, we want to be happy, and I get that. But the worst part about where the Bears situation is that they are perpetually one move away from looking completely different, obviously because they're trying to swing at quarterback. Seattle hasn't restructured Russell Wilson's deal. Why haven't they done that? Jared Goff got a restructure. Matt Ryan got a restructure. These are 2 guys that both franchises seem to be ready to move on from. The only guy this is similar to is Aaron Rodgers, and they have a replacement in-house in Jordan Love. Why in the world aren't the Seahawks committing to Russell Wilson? Until they do, it's like they're leaving the door open. And I don't think that the Bears are ultimately going to land him. I'll put that out there. But they're not closing the book on that story. And if Ryan Pace really is in the last year of his contract and needs to make that big move, a quarterback acquisition one way or another could do it. And for crying out loud, if Mac Jones goes at number 3, it changes the whole board. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's crazy. When we talk about a quarterback carousel, I think this year it's more of a quarterback circus, the way everything's going on. That you look at all the rumors that came out with Russell Wilson, and I think Bears fans were like, it's not going to happen, but I really, really, really want it to happen. And we're still at the point, is the fact that what you said there, where they haven't restructured his deal, which you would have expected, especially now with Tyler Lockett getting his money today, that you would have expected that Russell Wilson's deal would have been restructured.
Slam dunk.
So it doesn't make too much sense there. Now, look, I agree with you. I still think that they'll end up restructuring his contract and it'll get done for them, and then the Bears will have to try and do something in the draft. It's a tough one. If what we've heard in terms of like fan mock drafts and all the analysts that are talking about Justin Fields falling, if he starts falling to 7 or 8, honestly, I feel like you need to, if you are going to move up, you probably have to move up above Carolina.
I think that makes all the sense
to get him. So I think that's the only way you, as a Bears fan, if you want one of those quarterbacks in the first round. Because look, I think we can all pretty much agree, unless this is a smoke screen for everything about Mac Jones, the top 5 quarterbacks probably go within the top 10 picks. Mm-hmm. And it's the first time, I'm pretty sure it's first time ever that would happen. So it's one of those that is quite, it's a little bit crazy. And I know the other rumor that we heard throughout the start of the offseason anyway was surrounding Deshaun Watson. So it's a very interesting one now. Obviously, nothing's going to happen because you see Nick Caserio come out and say that we don't condone this type of behavior, that obviously the league still has to investigate what's going on. I think what most people can kind of tell is that there's been a lot of teams, according to, I think, Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport have come out and said that a lot of teams have just said they're not willing to engage right now because they're going to let the process go out. So that also leaves the Russell Wilson situation in kind of the Seahawks have a bigger kind of benefit now, because there's now teams that were seriously in on Deshaun Watson, that if they have an inkling that Russell Wilson is available, let's just say, because the likes of the Dolphins were involved in the Deshaun Watson, if they decide that they want to go for Russell Wilson, they'll trade Tua. That's exactly what the Seahawks have been looking for, that you can give all those picks, but also a quarterback. So everything that's come out about Deshaun Watson now, even if the Bears weren't going to land Deshaun Watson, it's actually made it that much harder for the Bears to actually fix the quarterback position. So again, Anthony, I'll go to you on this one, because the quarterback that they did bring in was Andy Dalton. Looking back on everything that's happened up to this point, do you think that was the right decision, or do you think that maybe the Bears should have held off? Because look, you look at last offseason, if they didn't go and trade for Nick Foles, what was it, 4 or 5 weeks later, Andy Dalton was available because he got released by the Bengals and he would have been available for $3 million. Do you think that a similar thing could happen this season? Let's say the 49ers do pick Mac Jones or Justin Fields or Trey Lance, and they're like, in training camp, like, they're too good not to start early on, like Russell Wilson for Seattle, and then Jimmy Garoppolo isn't the 49er anymore. There's things like that can happen where players that might be a little bit above the level of Dalton might become available. So do you think that maybe it was the right decision that we had to get in a quarterback that was good, or do you think that Ryan Pace should have waited a little bit longer?
I think it's double fold. I think the first part of that question is Jimmy G as good or worse than Andy Dalton? Meh. Literally meh. My thinking on it would be that I think Pace suddenly realised that, we're not going to get Russell. So, oh crap, we're left here with Nick Foles. And, oh God, I don't know what to do here. Okay. Oh yeah, look, just take Andy. And Laser probably said to him, I can work with Andy Dalton. I've got him. I can work with him. The quarterback thing is really interesting, but the other elements of the Bears that kind of sits even more is the fact that you look at their offensive line as well that Dalton will be playing with. You look at the fact that he's got running backs with real quality now, with Cohen come back, but also like Williams is super signing. You've got like Monty is obviously still there and run the ball. So there's a conversation now to be looked at. Do you look to run the football? So is Dalton going to throw long balls to Mooney? Probably not. Can we create a scheme with Laser that involves just using our running backs and go back to running the ball? With Nagy as head coach, I doubt it, but that's probably the way we should be looking towards if we're going to be stuck with Dalton. I think while no one really wanted Andy Dalton, he's who we have now. I get what you're saying, Rob. I really do. I just don't think we're getting a quarterback in the first round. I don't think any of them are going to fall. I think the 49ers are going to treat the worst thing that could happen to the Bears because it just opens up everything else. And you mentioned Carolina, but New England want a quarterback as well. There's no way on earth they're going to go with Cam again. They're not. They spent a lot of money to get people around him. He's going to want to get somebody else other than Cam. So we're going to have to beat. There's two. I'm sure there's 4 or 5 other quarterback requests as well. And we don't exactly have a lot of picks to be offering in the first place. And again, go back to Ron's point, he's 100% right as well. I think we're not going to go into 2022 picks, 2023 picks, unless it's for Russell Wilson. So we just have to almost accept this and go, we're either going to tank or we're going to go the other way and we're going to create a brand new culture when it comes to offensive football. And that would be run the damn ball. And it's about getting your O-line properly done. It's about getting a proper way of scheming stuff to get Monty on the ball. That's the only way we can do this, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Where you say that the only way we trade away kind of 22 or 23 picks is for Russell Wilson. That's the one thing I probably slightly disagree with, because I think if Nagy and Pace say to McCaskey during the draft, we want to trade up for Justin Fields or Mac Jones or whoever it is, if they reach kind of 9-10 or within the teens, I think you probably would see a trade that would get accepted there where the ownership would let them do it. Because look, it comes to the point of if you're not going to let them trade away future draft capital, what's the point in having them as your GM and your head coach? Because
and there you go.
And that's the problem.
Because right there is the problem.
Yeah, because if you don't trust them to make the football decisions for your club, then they shouldn't be there. And that's the biggest thing. And it's the thing that I think we all get a bit kind of annoyed about, but it is what it is. And like, I agree with you to a certain extent, Anthony. I think that at some point that we are going to have where we're probably not going to get a first round quarterback, that you're going to have to look at someone kind of further on, and then it'll be about how good can the Bear Scouts actually be in terms of identifying someone that isn't going to be ready this season, may not even be ready next season, but that you can actually work with over the period of time. We will go through some of those options a little bit later in the show. In terms of for the free agent additions and offense, we've really only had 3, and we've spoken about 2 of them already in terms of Andy Dalton and Damian Williams. The other one is just Elijah Wilkinson, the O-line depth from Denver. So, Robert, how well do you think the Bears have tried to upgrade the offense? Because I know they were involved in Kenny Golladay, but that wasn't going to happen once the Giants were going to offer him a long-term deal. I think if the Giants were offering him a 1-year deal and everybody else was, he probably would have gone to the Bears just because it's his hometown. But when you get a deal like he did in New York, it was a no-brainer for him. So,
especially in this market.
Yeah, especially that we've really only seen him, and we've seen today with Tyler Lockett get their money. Everybody else, like you see Juju Smith-Schuster had to go back to the Steelers, and kind of everybody else, you didn't see too much money being passed out for some of the wide receivers. And look, that's the reason you saw Allen Robinson sign that franchise tag as quick as he did, because he initially wasn't going to sign it, and then he sees the wide receiver market, and then he has to sign it. I guess one, Robert, is how well do you think that they did do with those 3 signings that they did make? And then does the kind of pursuit of Kenny Golladay tell us anything about maybe some of their intentions in the draft if they don't go, or if they can't get a quarterback in the first or second round?
Sure. So it depends on what you're thinking, or like what your expectations were for this next season. In my opinion, what you thought of their free agency so far. They have spent almost no future money, even though they converted Dalton into a $5 billion note next year, which I don't like. I really think that this is the year to not push money into the future, to try to clean the cap up a little bit. But outside of that, let's put it this way, okay? Normally, I expect Pace to sign a couple of players at least for, or I expect Pace to sign a couple of players that aren't going to play very well and are really expensive. And he hasn't done that this year. So it's almost like I'm trying to give him points for not being an idiot. But I know that at the end of the day, it's almost like he's ultimately just scoring 0. So would I say I'm happy with his free agency so far? No. Like you talked about, Anthony, Damian Williams, the linebacker from Denver, whose name I can never pronounce. I think it's Atuachu. And then the guy who's replacing Brent Urban. There's a whole bunch of signings that you're like, hey, from a depth perspective, not bad. Christian Jones, a starting linebacker on the depth roster, that's really solid. But do they like really move the needle for a team that has Andy Dalton leading the charge so far? Probably not. Is Desmond Trufant going to hold up as a cornerback 1? Probably not. Is Jalen Johnson ultimately like healthy and ready to take on that role in this next season? I couldn't tell you, because I could have sworn that last season he was playing press like an animal for the first 6 weeks of the year, and then suddenly stopped playing press, became one of, according to most metrics, one of the worst cornerbacks in the league as an off-man corner. And sure, there's something to be said for like a rookie grading scale that you're going to have a learning curve, you're going to struggle, but it kind of looks like he might have torn something in that shoulder and just played through it most of the year, which would not be a great sign for a guy with 3 shoulder surgeries. So like, again, to circle back to the question, what do I think of the Bears free agent signings? I think they've been okay at best. I'd give them like a C, but I almost feel like the better word would be incomplete. They haven't done anything that costs the team in the future, but they definitely haven't moved the needle, and they haven't gotten better in the conventional sense compared to everybody around them. The Vikings loaded up on free agents. The Lions got their fair share of free agents. The Packers are the Packers. And in the division that generally got better, the Bears didn't. And so I'd say that relatively speaking, they got worse this year. Maybe it's a future play, but like you said, Anthony, I think it was you talking about like, where are they going? What can we tell from this team? I definitely can tell you that the Golladay interest and the Trent Williams interest says to me that Pace and Nagy would prefer to compete this year if they got to choose. So I don't think the tank is going to be on the table. Can they accidentally tank? Sure. The schedule is such a nightmare that they could put together the best team they can and still lose a ton of their games. But are they going to go for like the Jacksonville style, strip it down and get 1 win? No chance. So it'll all depend on what happens in the weeks leading up to the draft. I know we were talking earlier about the Bears' options in Dalton. I agree with you, Anthony. I do think Dalton was ultimately a panic-driven signing. Does that make him a bad choice? That's a different question, but I do think that like at or after the draft, they would have had shots at different quarterbacks depending on like what Miami did with number 3, which obviously they traded, or what Atlanta does with number 4. There are going to be different options at this point. My money is on the Bears walking out of the draft with like Andy Dalton and Kellen Mond as their quarterback room, or Andy Dalton and Davis Mills. But like you said, Ciaran, if a quarterback slides further than they should, I definitely think the Bears' eyes are going to get a little wider. You said it well, Anthony. Chances are Justin Fields doesn't make it past 7, let alone 8. It's if he does, I think that alarm bells are going to start going off. And I don't think New England is going to let that happen because there's too many quarterback-needy teams in the draft this year. But hey, if we've learned anything with the draft, it's that you just never know. And so We'll see what plays out. But either way, it's been infuriating, honestly, as like somebody who likes to cover the Bears, trying to talk about this offseason, because everything means nothing until like at least after the draft, when all this stuff is set in stone. Right now, the cement still feels wet to me. And that doesn't mean that the Bears are suddenly going to turn into a contender, but I know they're going to sign a safety. Like, I know there are too many safeties out there right now that are high caliber safeties still looking for jobs. And the Bears have this gaping hole that they're telling us is filled by Deion Bush. I don't believe it. So they're going to sign a safety. They're going to make a couple other acquisitions. Danny Amendola, certainly, I wouldn't say he's a shoo-in, but a wide receiver like him helps you not go into the draft with a guy who you openly declared you were trying to cut, like Anthony Miller, and then didn't cut him. So unless you're going into the draft with Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, and a bunch of guys that you openly don't like, then I expect the Bears to make a couple other moves, but I think they're going to be those smaller kinds of moves. And it's just a matter of like what happens at quarterback, and the dominoes fall the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's an interesting point there that you make in terms of the wide receivers, because I think it's fairly safe to assume that the Bears will probably select a wide receiver at some point in the draft. And like you said, that Anthony Miller was pretty much, it was reported that they were trying to trade him, and look, eventually he'll just get cut. For me, I feel like it's crazy that Javon Wims hasn't been cut yet. After everything that he did this season, how he's still on the roster really does show to, if you want to change and have a good culture throughout your locker room, that's a guy that should have been cut months ago. And unfortunately, I don't believe that he'll be on the team. I believe that they'll probably bring in a couple of players. And I'll go through a couple of the questions here for you here, Anthony, and then we'll kind of move on. But one of the things that I think may happen is you'll see with the salary cap where it is, after the draft, we will see a lot of veterans that do get cut, because you want the younger players coming in so you can stay under the salary cap. And you will see some interesting names out there where maybe it becomes a better time for the Bears to be able to bring them in at a much lower salary for this season. Now, we have a couple of questions that have come in here. So first from Parker. So if the Bears were never in the market for Wilson, how much differently would we be looking at this offseason? That's a really interesting point, is if we didn't expect the Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson, and we just knew that Trubisky and Foles, they just weren't it, and we are where we are in the draft, do you think as many people would have been angry about the Andy Dalton acquisition?
I think you're that question's spot on. Had we not been given the dream of Russell Wilson, the idea that, oh my God, he obviously couldn't wear number 3, but he was going to wear a number, he's going to be a Bear, he is the franchise quarterback that we've never had. Suddenly there was all his dreams, and it became Andy Dalton. I actually think there'd have been more support if Mitch got renewed. I think if Mitch was given a new contract, I think people would have been more, okay, do you know what? What else is there to do it? Instead, it became a complete negative and downgrade. I think the bigger issue as well, I know, Robert, you were saying earlier on, but the question I ask is the cap space that the Bears don't have. And also then the history, going back to the first point that we started, is about what McCaskey was, the history of Robert Quinn, I think, is still hanging over pace. I think the contract that Robert Quinn got has made everybody in Hallis Hall go, whoa, hold on a second. We're not giving Robinson $18 million. He did his ACL the last time he got a contract extension. Look at the last time you were given a quarterback to go early in the draft and give away our capital. Didn't work out. And then we gave you a big money signing last year to make us a Super Bowl contender, and you made a screw of that. And the fans are looking at that, and then they're seeing, oh, but it's going to be Russell. Russ is definitely going to be the man. And as the question was asked, suddenly we were Andy Dalton, and now we're looking at, again, Robert, great point, we're looking at the Packers being the Packers, looking at the Lions getting better, we're looking at Vikings potentially getting better. I always use the word potentially when it comes to the Vikings because I never actually see it happening. But it's just, I just would fear, and then you look at our cap space and you look at us kicking contracts down the road. I love Khalil Mack, absolutely love him. But here we go. In 3 years' time, will I still love him when he's still getting paid an absolute bucket load off our cap? Yeah, again, going back to the question. Yeah, definitely. I think the Russell and the Deshaun figures have made Dalton look even worse than people are saying it.
Yeah, look, and then the next comment that's come in, so from Dave, so it might be controversial thing to say, but we now have Andy Dalton as a QB1, so instead of moaning about him, let's get behind him 100%. Look, I think that's the right opinion right now, is that we do have to get behind, because by the end of the draft, he's probably the only kind of experienced quarterback that we're going to have on the roster. I would expect Nick Foles will get traded for something very, very small, or because I don't think they can release him. I think if he's going to be off the roster, they're going to have to organize some sort of trade. I know there's been rumors with the Denver Broncos and also with the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, the next kind of couple of comments that came in: trade back, acquire picks, then reach for Mills or Mond. I think we say this pretty much every year. Isn't it a year to trade back? But again, in order to be able to do that, you need someone to trade up. And if the quarterbacks are gone pretty early, most trades are in relation to quarterbacks, or usually offensive tackles. And look, if there's an offensive tackle that's going to be on the board that the Bears like, they'll take them at 20. To a certain extent, I agree. Well, we're not in a position to trade up. The only time that I would say something different, and we'll move on kind of towards the draft here, Robert, is let's say the two scenarios. Obviously, the first one is if one of the quarterbacks starts to slip, then you have the opportunity to trade up. But let's say they do go, let's say 5 of the quarterbacks go in the top 7 picks, which is ridiculous to think about. But then you start to see some of these offensive tackles slowly fall. So I heard an interesting point the other day of Peneso, that if he starts falling, let's say just because the quarterbacks, and it's nothing to do with him, it's just to do with just the way the draft board is going. If he does reach to 10, 11, do you think it would be very beneficial for the Bears to then actually go up and trade for your left tackle for the future? Because I know some of the comparisons that we've seen from him, and the fact is I was reading this, that he only turns 21 in, I think it's October. I know a lot of people say that you trade up for a quarterback, but if you can trade up for a top of the range offensive tackle that you know is going to be your left tackle for the next 10 to 15 years, I think that's just as valuable as trading up for a quarterback.
So the scary thing for me is that any one player that you trade up for has to be worth the other players that you pay for them. I'll give you an example. Trevis Gibson, the edge rusher, wears like I can't remember what number he is. I think it's like 99. He is, according to what we decided, worth not only the 5th round pick that we traded from the 2020 draft, he's also worth the 4th round pick that we now don't have out of the 2021 draft. So you take a guy like Sewell and you ask yourself, like, okay, so Sewell is absolutely incredibly good. Is he worth a 2nd round receiver as well as Christian Darrisaw to get that one player? And honestly, I don't know. The scary thing about trading up for a quarterback, of course, is the risk. You're selling out everything to go get that quarterback. But hey, at least if you, and we actually don't have a success story yet, like technically you could point to Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes, but both of them were actually outside of the top 10. So we don't have a success story recently of a team trading up into the top 10 and getting their guy. It used to be Carson Wentz, but he's a Colt now. So when I look at somebody like Sewell, I'm thinking to myself personally that it's either the right year to trade back if you don't get anything, like you talked about. 5 quarterbacks, top 7 picks, game over. You're not getting one. So you got to go to plan B. And if you could get a left tackle, maybe he's not the franchise left tackle. Instead, he's just very good, but you're able to upgrade off of Charles Leno. Then you go to the 2nd round, you pick up either a wide receiver or another interior offensive lineman, and you get all those bodies that you need from your draft order, because the Bears right now, if you guys are seeing what I'm seeing, are starting to run thin on talent. Like if we were to count the talented players, they've got guys like Khalil Mack, Allen Robinson. I'm not going to count Andy Dalton, but like Khalil Mack, Allen Robinson, Eddie Jackson, and other talent across the roster. Tariq Cohen, David Montgomery. I had to take a second. I was like, okay, hang on, Robert. You know all these names, but so Akeem Hicks, another one. You've got these talented guys on the roster, but they're all aging that little bit. And part of me thinks that I would rather take the third best, still first round graded left tackle if it meant that I got to keep my second round pick, which, like you're saying, if you're going to go up to number 12, that's probably the price you have to pay for it. Either that or like a third this year and a third next year. And third rounders can become perfectly good wide receivers, let alone running back options. So those picks are valuable to me, but I know that's the boring answer. Everybody wants to hear, forget, give me Sewell. He's going to be an all-pro. And you just don't know.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, though. Sorry, Karen. Hit the nail on the head. You look at our wide receiver last year in Mooney, and you look at the wide receiver the year before in Miller, and you swap. What are you looking at? What are you looking at in the difference? Only difference is one was in the 5th, one was in the 2nd, and you're like, what? There's no consideration to that. And I think you're right. I'm with you. If somebody said to me you went up for Sewell, I'd be dancing around the place going, this is fantastic. But you're not looking. I think the best way you can put that is you're looking in 2 years' time and you go, Sewell, superstar, brilliant, absolutely amazing. However, we gave up A, B, C, D, and E, who are now got Super Bowl rings because they all went and joined whoever.
And if he's an all-pro, it's worth it. But what if he's not? There's always that chance. There's always that chance. Anthony Miller, I think he's a ball of talent. But if he doesn't work well with the coaching staff and he really is what is reported, that talent doesn't matter. He cost not only a second rounder, but he also cost a fourth rounder the year that they traded away for him. So he cost 2 players himself. It's such a weird gambit trading up for these players because in the moment, everybody looks and says, I love it. He's going to be this. It's going to work. And then all of a sudden you look back and you say to yourself, James Daniels is like good, but he's like great. And we don't care because he was a very normal second rounder and getting a good, not great player is fine. But imagine trading up for him. If we traded up for somebody like that, it gets different.
Can I ask a question on that? Use Mitch as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we didn't go up for Mitch.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say Mitch went for, let's say, early second round or late first round. Let's say he gets a renewal contract at Bears.
Probably. I mean, I'll tell you right
there's
now.
There's no pressure on him.
I've never had the issue with even the Bears trading up for Mitch Trubisky. Like, I'll never tell you that picking Mitch was the problem. I'll sometimes just tell you it didn't work out. I mean, I loved Mitch coming out of school. I've learned a lot from Mitch in figuring out why he didn't work and trying to apply it from other quarterbacks, because really the 1-year starter thing, it didn't mean Mitch didn't gain enough experience. I mean, maybe it did. But from an evaluation standpoint, it meant that all we got to see is a guy who's practiced an offense for 3 straight years. We didn't get to see what growing pains looked like, Like, you couldn't point to, okay, it's his first year in the offense because he's a freshman. Instead, he's a redshirt senior, and now he's running the offense. This is what he looks like when he's in command. But anyways, putting the Mitch stuff aside, I don't ever think that picking a quarterback, especially one that was widely regarded as the number 1 quarterback prospect in the draft, should ever be looked at as Ryan Pace, idiot as he is, picked the wide-known best quarterback in the draft, and it didn't work. It's just the way everything fell out around it that, hey, whether Ryan Pace had the opportunity to fix it or not, sometimes I think we'll never really know. This is kind of his moment. But either way, it was fireable the way things fell out. He's not fired. He's our GM for some reason right now. So we're working with it. And I agree with the commenter that talked about how we got to get behind Andy Dalton. The nice thing about Dalton is that long story short, take Mitch's mobility, cut it in half, take Foles' ability to read a defense, cut that in half, combine them together, add a little bit of an accuracy salt, and you've got Andy Dalton. So is he a starting level quarterback? Yes. Is he the 28th best quarterback in the league? Yeah, right around there. So he's not good, and don't pass him off as good. But is he probably better than Foles behind the offensive line, Will Field? More than likely, because Foles has really only had success behind that top 2 offensive line in Philadelphia. And so I don't want to paint this as excitement. It's optimism, and it's understanding that unless the stars align and a bear-shaped eclipse passes over the world, the Bears probably win as many games as they lose next year. But I feel like if we walk into the draft with that understanding, and I mean, God forbid, Pace actually takes solid players at each position, and the Bears walk away with you saying, Anthony, like, hey, they got a solid slot wide receiver in the 6th round. I'm kind of excited to see that. They got another Cohen-like running back there too. Like, I would love to see the Bears just go offense. And I know they're probably going to take a corner at some point, but I'm going to be honest with you. If we could just get offensive line help, start to run the ball, because I'm not even like a run the ball kind of guy, but we've got Andy Dalton under center. So with Dave Montgomery, like, let's go get a Samuel Cosme, Christian Darrisaw type. Let's get a Mayweather type in the 2nd round. Let's add a wide receiver in the 3rd and just go from there. And if the defense kind of caves a little bit, okay. You got to live with what you can live with, and you clear out the cap as you go. But, man, I keep watching all these teams like the Chargers with Justin Herbert, like the Cardinals with Kyler Murray. I see them have these offenses that are sustainable year over year. And if the Bears can fix the offense, even if they fire Matt Nagy, that's going to go a lot further than fixing the defense, where if we saw anything out of 2018 season, it's that you get that great defense literally 1, maybe 2 years, and then it starts to fall off. It's so hard to keep that stuff together. So if the Bears could just, I mean, for crying out loud, I think I've said this on a couple podcasts, and I bet you guys would agree. I would also take 24 to 30 losses if we lost every game over some of the wins that we had last year, because those grindy 16 to 15 wins, I hate them. I hate watching those.
And I think the problem with that is it's created the problem where we are in the draft. Because had we lost when we should have lost in 2 of the first 3 games, we'd now be sitting here having a conversation about
we've been right there.
Or who do we take at the 7th? And not only that, we won the last 4 regular season games, which actually is the worst thing that could have happened to us. And everyone at the time was like, oh my God, we got into the playoffs. This is going to be brilliant. We were the worst playoff team I think I've seen in a long time. Our defense had decided to go home. I know you said about a skills player. I have such a beef with Eddie Jackson at the moment. I just think his money, and he has gone, thank you so much, Chicago Bears. And in the start of the season, he was all on social media. No one's going to target me. No one's targeting me. And they started targeting him in the second half of the season, and you were found wanting, kid. And it was just, there's those things that are, and the culture, as what Kieran said earlier on, the culture of what the Wims thing, what the Miller thing did, that culture that Nagy and Pace were raving about, saying it was all about culture. It's a disgrace. The defense was culture-wise defensively. They packed in and went home. You had players on offense who just didn't want to tackle, didn't really care. And then you had Miller and Wims. Like, you try to punch someone with a helmet on, you should be cut straight away. I mean,
yeah.
I'm shocked they're both still on the roster, honestly, if only because, like you talked about, I mean, Javon Wims got into a fight, and it didn't help that he dropped a God-given touchdown pass, like in the playoff game. Could have been a redemption moment. Instead, it was just worse. So I'm surprised he's still around. And then Miller got himself ejected to the same guy. Like, if fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me has any merit at all. It's when Mike Furry is, like, telling the wide receivers, don't punch him. Don't do it. Don't do it. I know you want. Don't do it. And somebody goes and does it. I'm not surprised that they want to release Miller. Like you're talking about, okay, so Eddie Jackson, look, what I've seen on film, at least, it's not that I'm about to tell you he's incredible. What I'm about to tell you is he looks like a player that wants to live up to that contract. And as a safety, if you don't let the game come to you, you are out of position. I'm hoping we will see a rebound year because it's all over the film. And I think he'll be able to get his head right in a season where I think we can all agree that between the Mitch and the Foles drama and the 6-game losing streak, the defense losing their head a little bit doesn't surprise me because I would have. That was a frustrating team to be a part of. But a lot of that also is me understandably hoping that the player that we're paying a whole lot of money can bounce back and play at the level that he was at, and also hoping that the Bears can supply him a pass rush, because I don't think that a ball hawking safety means much if the quarterback can just stand back there and throw like we saw Aaron Rodgers do in both of his meetings. Watching him get 4.5, 5 seconds of pass protection before throwing the ball was a knife to the soul.
But that also, sorry, Kieran, that also came from our play caller on defense on 3rd and 9 deciding to just drop everyone back or not rush the quarterback or have a skill. Like Rodgers could have had his playbook for both of our games last year. He could have actually owned the playbook and said,
he could have.
And I think that Desai is the only bit massive excitement I have going into this season. I'm really intrigued to see what this guy can bring. Because there's nowhere to read him. So if you're going up against his defense, you haven't got film to see what he's like. He's sort of like a Denver defense. He's a mix of everything. So I'm actually really excited to see what he does.
It should be fun.
I think Quinn and Mac were both injured a lot last year. I was so enthused about what Quinn was going to bring, and I got it so wrong. I hope I'm wrong. He actually does it the other way. I think Roquan gets no credit for the amazing season he had, and I just want to see him kicking on again. But it's just Eddie. I get what you're saying. I do get what you're saying. He tried to go get the magic plays, but didn't
catch the ball when it hits you in the hands. Can't take that one back. Like, he had a couple of shots at him and didn't convert. And I'm sure, like, I know I've felt the same way. When I say chances are nobody's kicking himself harder than Eddie is, nobody cares. Just catch the ball. And hopefully we see a rebound season in a season where, again, I'm not expecting much in terms of wins and losses. But if that was enough to not make me a fan, I would have quit being a Bears fan a long time.
Yeah. but that's the thing. Look, I know there's a lot of fans that have gone out there that now have gotten past the point of being angry at the Bears, because there's only so much that you can do before they're not changing anything. The dangerous part that the team is currently in is that there's a lot of fans that are apathetic towards the team. And that's the worst position you can be in as an organization, because if somebody's mad at you, it means that they care. If they don't care about what you're doing, that's when you start to lose fans. For other fans, like, I'm a huge Chicago Bulls fan. I'm obsessed with basketball. And up until last offseason, I was zoned out. I was watching a different NBA game every single night, and I never turned on the Bulls because it wasn't worth turning it on, because you knew what was going to happen. But you see, when changes are made and things, when they start to make sense, the fans start to come back, the fans start to actually pay attention, and they get involved. And the problem is, the Bears look like they're doing the opposite right now, where you're seeing a lot of fans not actually care. There's, like, at this point in the season, 3.5 weeks out from the draft, normally you see a lot of buzz for the draft coming, especially considering we have a first-round pick for the first time in 3 years. So it's one of those things that it just shows that what bad of a job that they have done. The one thing I want to go back on Eddie Jackson is, yeah, he had a very kind of poor season. The one thing that I would say is he's never really been known for his tackling ability, even playing with Alabama. And I was a huge fan of Eddie coming out, and it was unfortunate that he got the leg break, but obviously it worked out for the Bears. But it's one of those things that, as a safety, when the rest of the defense isn't playing well, it's very hard for you to shine as a safety, because a lot of the time you're living on the scraps of what the other players in defense are doing. And when you start to see the holes that we saw in the middle of the field quite early on the season, I know, Robert, we were talking about it pretty early on during the season, it's hard for safeties to really go out there, especially for a safety that's not physically demanding safety. We also saw that there were times during the season where Eddie Jackson did get the interception, did score, but then gets called back for a flag. I think that happened twice during the season. So for a player that he's one of those that needs, like you said, Robert, he does need to be patient. And when he is, then he's able to take his opportunities. And that's what we saw in 2018. In the past 2 seasons, it's looked like he's tried to force the play. And when you do that as a safety, that's when, like you said, you are pulled out of position. Go ahead, Robert.
And one thing, Anthony, to your point about Desai that should be exciting is that in Fangio's defense, Eddie Jackson had a very specific role. He was needed to sit in either the deep middle of the field or on his side, usually the field, with Amos taking the boundary. And in Pagano's defense, I can see what Chuck was trying to do, because he would move Eddie Jackson around all the time. He would shove Eddie Jackson up forward to try to take away middle zones. Basically, he tried to use him as a mobile dead zone. Like, if you put Eddie Jackson in X place, you force the quarterback to look somewhere else. So he kept kind of trying to surprise quarterbacks by shoving him into areas he wasn't supposed to be. The problem is that I don't think that this helped Jackson. And I think that that's part of the reason that Jackson got so, again, I'll call it frenetic. Like, he wasn't being patient. He wasn't letting the game come to him. He was trying to take a chunk out of the game. And if the dropped interceptions tell us anything, it's that he was in the wrong mindset and didn't make a play. But like, let's pull it apart a little bit. Let's assume it wasn't just a mental mistake and say, okay, I think he's trying to take too much out of this. In Desai's defense, for better or for worse, he should be able to stick to his role. And if the rest of the defense can perform for, or can produce for him, he will pay them back with plays that like he made in 2018. But I think you said it well, Kieran. I mean, we look at Jamal Adams. Safety is one of the most volatile positions in defense in terms of, you're an all-star, you suck, depending on what defense you're in and what the talent looks like around you. Khalil Mack gets to look like Khalil Mack pretty much regardless of anything. But Eddie Jackson's the guy who gets danced for a touchdown when a wide receiver ends up left with 15 yards of open space, and he's not a good tackler anyways. I completely get any vitriol directed towards him. He's the last guy you see before Robert Tonyan catches that touchdown pass and walks in week 12. So I get it. But I definitely am hopeful that Desai's defense in particular kind of allows him to get back to what he did best. And let's be honest, guys, he may never live up to that massive contract extension that he earned, because it's always hard for players to do that. But if he can at least justify the value, I think that we'll be ultimately happy as Bears fans.
Yeah, the one thing I like about Desai more than anything is that he's been here through some really bad defenses and really good defenses. So he knows what works, and he knows what would work for the talent that's there. Now it's obviously going to be a little bit trickier, as we mentioned, that there is no Kyle Fuller this year. And you look at it, and Desai comes from kind of Vic Fangio style of thinking, and you could see just how much Vic Fangio wanted Kyle Fuller within his team. So it is going to be a tricky one that he's going to have to try and pinpoint, well, what players suit the system that I want to run? Because Sean Desai needs to make sure that he has his system put in place, because, again, he's a young coach that if he can be successful, that what ideally for the Bears is that you see kind of the improvement that we saw in Brandon Staley when he left, that we want to see that from Sean Desai. And look, you only have to listen to Sam Acho when he was talking about the hire of Sean Desai, that there is something that we can be. And I think one of the comments actually puts this best, that it's not so much excitement, but hope that we can see a little bit improvements from the defense. Because, again, even there's times when you can take away from a defense, but sometimes it actually works out well. Now, obviously, Kyle Fuller leaving is definitely not a good thing, but then you do look at it, and while he was very good in terms of his coverage, again, spending $20 million a season on a player that gets one interception, that's still an issue as well. That, unfortunately, with the way the contract worked out, this was always a possibility and actually a probability to happen. You were probably choosing between Kyle Fuller and Akeem Hicks, and my guess is the kind of captain mentality that Akeem Hicks has probably kept him around rather than Kyle Fuller.
You also got to look at the reintroduction of Eddie Goldman.
Yeah,
as another point to look at with our defense. And going back to Robert's point as well, I think there's a conversation that if you get better pass rush, if we get better pressure on a QB, you have more chance for the likes of Eddie and the likes of Alan, and I hope Gibson's coming back, by the way. But like those people to get shots at the ball and go make plays, which is why if we're guessing that Hicks is 20 million and so is Kyle Fuller, it was an easy choice, but I'd say it was a choice that Desai is comfortable enough with, because I think he wants to get more pass rush. I think he wants to get more pressure on QB. And with Goldman coming back in, that does help increase that potential and not put all the pressure. Because you saw when Hicks got injured last year, teams just ran straight down the middle of us, just ran up the guts of us. And we need to make sure that that's not the option to look at. And that's again, I think the person who asked the question is absolutely right. It is the hope part. It's the hope that'll kill you, though. It'll hope that'll kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's all about squad building as well, because what do we always say about the most dominant defenses? Generally, it's the ones that have the best front seven. And the Bears are probably thinking of, who do we let go? Do we let go of Kyle Fuller, who has been an excellent corner for the team for the last number of years, really since the season before he was signed, because I know he went through a number of injuries prior to that. But then you also have to look at, how do we want to build this team? Do we want to keep it with that kind of front seven? So you look at it, you have Eddie Goldman coming back, you have Akeem Hicks, and you have Bilal Nichols up front. So that's pretty set in stone. You hoping that Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack can have a bit of an improvement season. Look, you look at it in terms of the kind of QB rushes and for Khalil Mack, and his numbers were still up there, but he wasn't finishing. And often that's because there's not enough pressure from other areas to be able to have him at times get one-on-one. And because, look, you watch tape on Khalil Mack in every single season he's been in the NFL, and apart from his rookie season, he doesn't get one-on-one matchups. But if you can have Robert Quinn that starts, look, when we have someone like Barkevius Mingo look like he's rushing the passer better than Robert Quinn, you know you have a problem. Mm-hmm. It's also another good idea that when they brought back Mario Edwards, now I know that he's going to be suspended for, I think it's the first 2 games of the season, but that doesn't tend to matter too much now that it's a 17-game season, so it's really only one more. So that helps there as well. So you're seeing that they're trying to build up in the front seven, and I would not be surprised if you see the Bears select a defensive lineman, because they are planning for when Akeem Hicks goes, because when was his prime? Probably 2 years ago. And you have to get to the point of where you do let them go. And I feel like we're starting to get to that point of where you probably will see Akeem Hicks move on from Chicago. But right now, it's clear what they want to do is they want to maintain that front seven and have that as the strength of the defense that helps whoever is at the corner positions or at the safety positions. Like you said, Robert, I can't imagine that Deion Bush is starting at the safety position with Eddie Jackson. You need to have somebody else there alongside Eddie Jackson. I guess the last thing that I'm going to go on, and to kind of circle back to the offense in terms of the draft, I think we all can agree about wide receiver and offensive tackle is kind of the 2 most important positions. So let's say whether it's wide receiver first round and offensive tackle second round, or offensive tackle first round, wide receiver second round, with a 3rd round pick to bring in someone like, we've mentioned it before, Mills or Kellen Mond, or if you want to go further in the draft and select someone like Jamie Newman, you can do that. Does that also mean that the fact that we do have Andy Dalton in, that no matter who the quarterback coming in, it actually gives them time to learn? Because the last thing you want is what happened with Trubisky, is that you planned for Mike Lennon to play for the season, then 3 games in, well, Mitch, you're up. That was the biggest problem, that even though we were losing, losing the season and let Trubisky actually learn. We don't know how big of an impact Pat Mahomes sitting for that season under Alex Smith made. Now, we can all say, well, he still would have been the same level quarterback, but you may have seen more of that gunslinger that we saw at Texas Tech, because if you listen to any of the interviews that I know Brett Veach has done, where he has said that, no, him sitting behind Alex Smith, it let us kind of hone in on some of those things that he wasn't doing well in college. And then we've seen kind of what he's been able to do. I think having Andy Dalton there for, let's say, it doesn't matter if it's a 1st round quarterback or a 4th or a 5th round quarterback, having someone established that you know is going to play for the entire season can only help a rookie quarterback, because they know they can literally sit and just learn for the season. And I think that's one thing that is really important. And like I said, right now what the Bears do need to do is they need to make sure within those first 3 rounds that you do improve the talent that's on offense, whether that's you need to come away with an offensive tackle, whether that's Darashaw, which I think is probably the most common mocked player to the Bears at 20. It reminds me, and this is
it's boring.
It's
not a bad pick. It's just so funny where it's like, all right, who did we base Darisaw on again? It's just
but it reminds me of, and it's why I like Ryan Pace at some points of the draft, is it reminds me of the season where Aaron Donald was constantly being put in a mock, and it was pretty much the same. I think it was like 20 or 18 or somewhere around that range, and he goes one pick ahead. It's the one thing that, like you said earlier, Robert, I don't mind my GM trading up, because if there's a player that you believe in, go get him, because the worst thing that you want to do is leave it and then the team right in front of you picks a Hall of Fame type player like Aaron Donald. So I think the main question that I have for you, Robert, is actually having Andy Dalton a very good situation because look, unless Russell Wilson comes in, the only other addition in quarterback is going to be a rookie. And we've seen that if you're not getting one of the top 2 to 3 rookies, they shouldn't be starting in their rookie season.
And it feels that way. I mean, to give you, or overall, if I was going to like try to put this in one cohesive package, it's that it feels like nowadays the television set gives rookie quarterbacks 2 years of playing time before the decision is made on whether they're good enough or not. And in Patrick Mahomes' case, he didn't have to show his rookie year. So instead, we saw his MVP season and his Super Bowl season. So guess what? If Patrick Mahomes, honestly, he could lead the league in interceptions and nobody's going to care. He's earned so much grace because those first 2 seasons were concretely as good as they could possibly be. I definitely think that quarterbacks blossom in their third year. There's a lot of data that supports that for the most part, if Jared Goff is what he is in his third year, you can expect him to be just about that way throughout the rest of his career. You don't end up with a whole lot of these Alex Smith late bloomers. The only problem with Andy Dalton nurturing a young quarterback is that I don't know if the next regime cares about any quarterback that this group brings in. Again, I'm trying to think about this from like the true high level here, right? If we draft Kellen Mond, let's say, in the 3rd round, and the Bears decide to throw him to the Wolves in the last 4 games of the schedule, which, to be clear, is, if memory serves, it is Pittsburgh, it's Tampa, like Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's the Seattle Seahawks, and the Las Vegas Raiders. So not exactly
easy enough.
Not exactly easy there. And Mond goes out there, and you know what? He doesn't suck. And the Bears are drafting at number 7. Are we now drafting a defensive tackle at 7 instead of one of the best quarterbacks in the draft? Like, does Mond become a backup, or if he's just good enough, does he become our hope for the future to be maybe good enough? Because I feel like sometimes in Chicago, all we talk about is, can the quarterback be average? And I know we all want to have our sights higher than that. So I just find myself wondering, it's the only drawback to taking a quarterback. If they draft a quarterback at 3, that's even better for the future, because it means that picks 1 and 2 will be something else and that they'll be able to stick with the team regardless of regime. I just find myself wondering whether, let's say it's Davis Mills, whether he is going to become the bet that we have to place the franchise on, like what we're seeing Philadelphia do with Jalen Hurts, which, for better or for worse, they're now taking a 2nd rounder and putting the entire franchise on him. Or are we going to say, yeah, I know that was you guys' 3rd round pick, but he's going to be like our backup until he goes somewhere else because we're going to look at Sam Howell or something like that. I don't know. It's the most intriguing question that I can't answer. And it's part of why, Anthony, I'm thinking if that 5th quarterback, if it's Lance, it's Fields, it's Jones, whoever it is, makes it to 9 with Denver, part of me thinks that Pace and Nagy may trade up for that because a young quarterback gives you, oh, look at that, he's getting better, we did something here, because they're trying to earn brownie points in a season that I just don't think the schedule is hard is going to be a good excuse come hire fire time this time next year. But who knows? George McCaskey kept them on this year, so
and that's the point. Sir, that's the point. Goes back to the very first question in the whole conversation: is are they on the block? And genuinely,
I don't think so.
I don't think they are either. I really don't. I think everything they're doing now is pointing to exactly what you just said there. It's pointing towards the fact that they're giving themselves grace, whether they go up in the draft, whether they go to the second round, or they're almost looking at, look, our schedule is shocking anyway, lads. We're not going to do well. We're starting to give ourselves cap space by only giving 1-year contracts to these people. So at the end of the year, we're able to get rid of absolutely everybody, and we've got a full list behind us. And look, we've still got our Darnell Mooney's, we've still got our Roquan Smiths, people like that we can build our franchise around. And it just doesn't smell of desperation. But then, in the back of my head, then I see the Golladay go, then I see the Williams go, and then I see the Russ go. And you're like, oh, maybe it is absolute desperate. Because let's put it this way. If they get Russell Wilson, and even if we tanked, they'll be the people that brought Russell Wilson. They get another 2-year deal, and on we go.
And hey, if they're, just to throw in on that, you could argue that getting Russell Wilson's a future-oriented move. Like, how bad is Russell Wilson going to be when he's 37 years old?
100%.
He'll be 33 next season.
The best quarterback we've ever seen.
Exactly. Even if he's on the decline, where's he declining from, and how fast is it going to be? Passing it back over to you.
Yeah, it is crazy that, look, if Ryan Pace got Russell Wilson, I guarantee you the next day you would hear the organization announce whatever extension I believe they've probably given him already. Because like we said before, the moves don't make sense to a GM that is in a final year or a make it or break it year. Is that what people need to remember is that Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace have a lot of trust with George McCaskey. So unless Ryan Pace wants to let Matt Nagy go, I think that McCaskey is loyal to a fault, to where I don't think he's going to let them go unless it's absolutely terrible. And the thing is, there's not going to be enough fans in the stands for the Bears season this year again. You'll have a limited capacity where you won't really see what the Bears fans are kind of thinking, because before, if you had full capacity and half people are going or a quarter of people are going and everyone's booing, the ownership starts to see what's going on. We saw the same thing, like I said earlier, at Bulls games, that nobody was going to the games. Anyone that was booing when they were losing by 30 or 40 points a night. And that's the biggest thing. One of the things that you came up with, Robert, that's actually really interesting is you mentioned about if you brought in a third-round quarterback, let's just say Kellen Mond, and if he doesn't suck and you could see, maybe he could turn into something. And then you do get the 4th, 5th, 6th overall pick next season. Me as a Bears fan, even if Kellen Mond was going to be a good quarterback, I would still want my organization to pick a quarterback, because we say it all the time. It's the best currency you can have in the NFL. Think about it. The Patriots had Brady for whatever it was, 15 years, 16 years, and they still signed Jimmy Garoppolo. You go back to Washington, they pick Robert Griffin III in the 2nd overall pick, and then in the 3rd or 4th round pick Kirk Cousins, and they've gotten something from that as well. We see it with Aaron Rodgers, and we've seen it last season when they were picking a quarterback. I think what you have to do is you just have to keep on adding quarterbacks. That's why I hated the one thing I hate about Ryan Pace and what he hasn't done is his first press conference, he said that we want to pick a quarterback every year, and now he's picked one quarterback. So if he turns that around and then he picks a quarterback in the 3rd round this year, picks a 1st-round quarterback next year, I don't care if he picks another quarterback the year after. Until you get that position sorted, you pick a quarterback every single season. The Bears don't have any excuse not to be picking a quarterback, because we haven't had a 4,000-yard quarterback ever. And that is, I was on another podcast earlier today, and how embarrassing that actually is as a Bears fan to the team that actually established the position. So it makes it even worse, the fact that we haven't had that. And now you're starting to see quarterbacks get 5,000 yards. So we're still at that point where whether it's Kellen Mond and if he doesn't suck, or if he isn't terrible and you can see a little bit progression, you still pick one, because, okay, well then Andy Dalton's gone, and then you can choose between, or Kellen Mond will probably start, and then you would have your rookie staying behind him, and then the season after that you would decide kind of who's to go with. But that's what good franchises do. They pick quarterbacks until they get it right. And unfortunately, that's what we haven't done.
And
even if they get it right,
you got it. Go ahead,
even if they get it right, they still pick a quarterback. Look at the Packers. And it's the example. Look, we're going back to Sid Luckman. Like that's when we go back to, like, and it's that's all we have. And you hear about, it's all about the defense monster in the midway. That's not how football is played now. It's just a different sport, and you've got no vision. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Kieran, about the fact that Pace's first press conference, and I was going to bring that up, is that's all he spoke about: quarterback one, quarterback next time, quarterback, and it is embarrassing. It is embarrassing when you look at quarterbacks going around the league. Bears this offseason have been a bit of an embarrassment anyway. And I think it needs a big next 4 or 5 weeks. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that's pretty much all the time we have for today. But it was really good chatting to you guys. Really enjoyed having you both on again, Robert. We've spoken on earlier on in the season, and to see kind of the difference from when we were talking. I think that was roughly when Foles was starting to take over to now. But look, we'll definitely have you back on the podcast again. Do you want to tell people where they can find some of your work?
Sure thing. So you can find me over on WindyCityGridiron.com. That's WINDY CityGridiron.com. You can find me on Twitter at Robert K. Schmitz, RobertKSchmitz, where you'll find, between analysis, YouTube videos that I put together, and writing pieces, it's all going to be right around there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Anthony, for yourself, we'll definitely be having you on more regularly anyway onto the podcast. Is there anything that you want to rep yourself, or is it just to follow you on Twitter? Or
it's follow me on Twitter. I want to give a shout out to a couple of guys as well in the States, like Ryan Dangle and a couple of the lads that I've been in touch with in different parts. They've been really, really good to me as well. So I'd like to thank them. Stayed up earlier. Got to like guy in Australia now as well, Mike, and Dave and Derek as well in Scotland and England. You can follow me on Cork City Bears Fan. And I try, and whenever the game's going on, try to say as less controversial or as more controversial as I could possibly do. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the season starting again. I massively miss it. And look, Kieran, thank you so much for getting this on. This is a super conversation with you guys. It's much appreciated your time as well. And Robert, good to talk to you as well, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, for today, we're streaming on the HallOfSportz podcast network. Now, probably from next week or the week after, we will be streaming live on the Irish Bear Show YouTube channel, and also on Twitter. I know there's been a lot of stuff I know Periscope is shutting down, so hopefully the transition is seamless over onto Twitter. We had a few technical issues with that at the start of the show, that it wasn't picking up on Twitter, but we got it back working again. So again, we will be back next week for some more Irish Bear Show. Make sure you follow these guys on Twitter and all the socials that they have mentioned, and we'll see you guys next week.